The morning sun cast long shadows across Chicago O'Hare's gleaming terminal as Maya Richardson adjusted her blazer and checked her phone one final time. Gate B12 buzzed with the familiar chaos of business travelers rushing toward their 7:45 a.m. departure to Los Angeles. Her fingers traced the smooth leather of her boarding pass holder, a gift from her mother when she'd first started climbing the corporate ladder 15 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her presence commanding yet understated. The navy suit she wore was impeccably tailored, speaking to success without shouting it. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that framed her face perfectly, and her stride carried the confidence of someone who had earned every step forward in life. Around her, the terminal pulsed with morning energy. Coffee shops served their final rush of customers. Gate agents called out boarding announcements, and the endless parade of rolling luggage created a rhythmic backdrop to the controlled chaos. Maya had made this journey dozens of times, but today felt different somehow. There was an electricity in the air, a tension she couldn't quite place. She paused at the departures board, confirming what she already knew. Flight 447 to LAX, on time. Her presentation to the board of directors was scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific time, and this flight would give her exactly the buffer she needed. As Senior Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airlines, Maya had spent months preparing for this moment. The proposal in her briefcase could revolutionize how the industry approached customer service and operational efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was flying on a competitor's airline today. Her own company's morning flight had been canceled due to mechanical issues, forcing her to book last minute with Atlantic Airways. She'd managed to secure seat 2A in first class, paying the premium without hesitation. This presentation was too important to risk any delays or discomfort affecting her performance. As she approached Gate B12, Maya noticed the diverse crowd of passengers already forming loose clusters near the boarding area. A businessman in an expensive suit talked loudly into his phone about merger negotiations. A young mother juggled a toddler in a diaper bag while trying to find her boarding pass. An elderly couple sat quietly, hands intertwined, clearly nervous about flying. Maya chose a seat near the window, pulling out her tablet to review her presentation notes one final time. The financial projections were solid, the market analysis comprehensive, and the implementation timeline realistic. She'd anticipated every possible question, prepared responses to likely objections, and even created contingency plans for various scenarios. This was her moment to prove that her vision for the future of airline operations wasn't just innovative, it was essential. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that boarding would begin shortly. Maya glanced around, noting the subtle shift in energy as passengers began organizing themselves into the unofficial hierarchy of air travel. First-class passengers positioned themselves closer to the gate, business travelers checked their phones one last time, and families gathered their scattered belongings. She stood and moved toward the priority boarding line, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The gate agent, a pleasant woman in her 40s with kind eyes, smiled as Maya approached. There was something reassuring about these small human connections, even in the midst of the impersonal airline industry. Behind her, Maya could hear fragments of conversations. A man complaining about his connecting flight in Denver. Two women discussing a conference they were attending in Los Angeles. The subtle hum of anxiety and anticipation that always preceded a flight mixed with the more practical concerns of business travelers focused on their destinations rather than their journeys. Maya checked her watch. 7:20 a.m., right on schedule. She'd learned long ago that success in the airline industry and in life often came down to timing. Being in the right place at the right moment, prepared for opportunities when they presented themselves. Today's presentation represented 5 years of research, analysis, and strategic planning. It wasn't just about operational improvements, it was about fundamentally changing how airlines viewed their relationship with passengers. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Confirmed your 3:30 p.m. car service from LAX. Board meeting materials uploaded to a secure server. You've got this, Maya. She smiled, appreciating both the efficiency and encouragement. The boarding announcement echoed through the gate area, and Maya took her place in the priority line. She observed the other first-class passengers. mostly middle-aged business travelers, a few couples who appeared to be on vacation, and one woman about her own age who seemed oddly agitated, constantly checking her phone and muttering under her breath. Maya's thoughts drifted to her journey to this moment, starting as an entry-level analyst at a regional airline, working nights and weekends to complete her MBA, taking calculated risks on challenging assignments that others avoided. Each promotion had been hard-fought, each success building the foundation for the next opportunity. The airline industry wasn't known for its diversity in leadership positions, but Maya had never let that discourage her. Instead, she'd used it as motivation to work harder, think more creatively, and deliver results that couldn't be ignored. The line began moving forward, and Maya gathered her belongings. Her laptop bag contained not just her presentation materials, but years of accumulated knowledge about what worked, what didn't, and what needed to change in airline operations. She'd seen the industry from every angle: operations, customer service, finance, and strategic planning. This comprehensive understanding gave her unique insights that she was eager to share with the board. As she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Maya felt a familiar surge of anticipation, not just for the flight, but for what waited at the destination. This presentation could change everything, not just for her career, but for how millions of passengers experienced air travel. The gate agent scanned her pass, smiled, and gestured toward the jet bridge. Maya walked down the narrow corridor connecting the terminal to the aircraft, her mind already shifting into presentation mode. She visualized walking into that boardroom, commanding attention from the moment she entered, delivering her proposal with the confidence and expertise that had brought her this far. The flight attendant greeted her at the aircraft door with a professional smile, and Maya stepped into the first-class cabin. The familiar smell of leather seats and recycled air welcomed her aboard. She moved toward the front of the plane, scanning the seat numbers until she found 2A. But something was wrong. Her seat wasn't empty. A woman sat in seat 2A, her blonde hair perfectly styled, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head despite the early morning hour. Her oversized Louis Vuitton handbag sprawled across both the seat and the adjacent space, as if claiming territory. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her manicured fingers tapped impatiently against her phone screen. Maya approached with measured steps, her professional demeanor intact, despite the spike of irritation she felt. She'd learned years ago that staying calm in unexpected situations was crucial in her industry. Weather delays, mechanical issues, difficult passengers, these were all part of the business she'd mastered. "Excuse me," Maya said politely, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of managing complex operations. "I believe you're in my seat." The woman looked up with barely concealed annoyance, her blue eyes scanning Maya from head to toe in a way that felt deliberately dismissive. "I don't think so," she replied, her voice carrying a slight southern drawl mixed with practiced condescension. "I always sit in 2A. There must be some mistake." Maya pulled out her boarding pass, holding it where the woman could clearly see the seat assignment. "My boarding pass shows 2A. Perhaps you could check yours." The woman, who appeared to be in her early 40s with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of country club memberships and charity galas, made no move to retrieve her boarding pass. Instead, she leaned back in the seat as if settling in more permanently. "Listen, honey," she said, the endearment dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Rebecca Hamilton. I fly first class on this route every month for my husband's business. The staff knows me. There's obviously been some computer error." She gestured vaguely toward Maya. "Maybe you should check with the gate agent. I'm sure they can find you something in coach." The casual assumption that Maya belonged in coach, despite her first-class boarding pass and obvious business attire, sent a familiar chill down Maya's spine. She'd faced this kind of subtle discrimination countless times throughout her career, the assumption that she didn't belong in executive meetings, luxury hotels, or first-class cabins. A flight attendant approached, her name tag reading Jennifer. She was younger than Maya, probably in her late 20s. With kind eyes that darted nervously between the two women. The tension was becoming noticeable to other passengers, who were beginning to glance over with curiosity and discomfort. "Is everything all right here?" Jennifer asked, her voice professionally cheerful but strained. Rebecca spoke before Maya could respond. "Yes, there's been a seating mix-up. This woman thinks she has my seat, but I always sit in 2A. Could you help sort this out? Jennifer turned to Maya with an apologetic expression. Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass, please? Maya handed over the pass, watching as Jennifer's eyes widened slightly when she read the name. The flight attendant glanced at Maya again, then at Rebecca, clearly struggling with what she was seeing versus what she'd expected. Mrs. Richardson, Jennifer said carefully, your boarding pass does show seat 2A. She turned to Rebecca. Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass as well? Rebecca huffed dramatically, digging through her expensive handbag with exaggerated annoyance. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to prove I belong here. She pulled out her boarding pass and thrust it toward Jennifer without looking at it. Jennifer examined the pass, and Maya could see the exact moment when the flight attendant realized the problem. Mrs. Hamilton, your seat assignment is 4C, not 2A. That's impossible, Rebecca snapped, her voice rising slightly. I specifically requested an aisle seat in the front row. I always get what I request. She looked directly at Maya for the first time since the confrontation began. Are you sure she didn't switch tickets somehow? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, acrid and unmistakable. Maya felt her jaw tighten, but years of navigating corporate boardrooms had taught her when to speak and when to let silence do the work. She simply looked at Rebecca with steady, unwavering eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jennifer's discomfort was becoming more apparent. Ma'am, I can assure you that boarding passes can't be switched. Mrs. Richardson's pass was issued by our system and shows seat 2A. Well, I'm not moving, Rebecca declared, crossing her arms. I've been flying this airline longer than she's probably been able to afford first class. I know people in the corporate. One phone call, and this whole situation will be resolved in my favor. Other passengers were now openly staring. An elderly gentleman in seat 1B shook his head disapprovingly. A business traveler across the aisle had paused his phone conversation to watch the scene unfold. The young mother Maya had noticed in the gate area was now boarding with her toddler. The child's innocent questions about why the lady was angry, creating an even more uncomfortable atmosphere. Maya made a decision. She set her laptop bag down in the aisle and looked directly at Jennifer. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, please. Rebecca laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, now you want to cause a scene? Typical. She addressed Jennifer as if Maya weren't standing right there. These people always think they can make demands and get special treatment. The phrase, these people, landed like a slap. Maya had heard it countless times throughout her career, always delivered with the same tone of barely concealed disdain. But she'd also learned that responding to obvious bait only gave people like Rebecca more ammunition. Mrs. Hamilton, Maya said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made Jennifer straighten slightly. I'm not making demands. I'm simply requesting the seat I paid for. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. You paid for first class? Really? She made a show of looking at Maya's professional attire again. What do you do? Let me guess. You're traveling on someone else's dime, right? Company expense account? The assumption that Maya couldn't afford first class on her own was particularly galling, given that Maya's annual salary likely exceeded Rebecca's household income. But Maya had learned that the best response to ignorance wasn't education. It was demonstration. Jennifer, Maya said, turning back to the flight attendant. I really do need to speak with your supervisor. And I'd appreciate it if you could call ahead to let the captain know we may have a delay. Something in Maya's tone, the quiet authority, the specific knowledge of airline protocols, made Jennifer look at her more carefully. Yes, ma'am. I'll get the lead flight attendant right away. Rebecca was becoming more agitated. This is insane. I'm not delaying an entire flight because someone can't accept that mistakes happen. Maybe if you were more polite about it instead of being so aggressive. Maya turned to face Rebecca fully for the first time. Mrs. Hamilton, I've been nothing but polite. I showed you my boarding pass, I asked you to check yours, and I've maintained my composure despite your assumptions about me. The only person being aggressive here is you. The cabin had grown quiet, except for the sound of other passengers settling into their seats and stowing luggage. Even the flight attendants preparing for departure had slowed their movements, sensing the escalating tension. Rebecca's face flushed red. Don't you dare lecture me about manners. I've been flying longer than you've been alive, and I know how things work. This airline values loyal customers, not troublemakers who think they can waltz in here and... And what? Maya interrupted quietly. Sit in the seat they paid for? The question hung in the air as footsteps approached from the front of the cabin. The lead flight attendant approached with measured steps, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and her uniform bearing the small gold wings that indicated years of service. Susan Morrison had seen everything in her 23 years with Atlantic Airways, but the tension radiating from row 2 was palpable even from the galley. Good morning, ladies. I'm Susan, the senior flight attendant. Jennifer mentioned there might be a seating concern? Her voice carried the diplomatic tone of someone trained to diffuse situations before they spiraled out of control. Rebecca immediately launched into her complaint, her voice taking on a different quality, more refined, more calculated. Susan, thank goodness. I'm Rebecca Hamilton. I fly this route monthly for Hamilton Development Corporation. There's been a terrible mix-up with the seating assignments. I always book 2A specifically because of my medical condition. I need quick access to the restroom due to my circulation issues. She gestured toward Maya dismissively. This woman is insisting she has my seat, but surely there's been some computer error. Maya noticed how Rebecca had suddenly developed a medical condition that hadn't been mentioned before, and how her tone had shifted to sound more reasonable, more sympathetic. It was a masterful performance, and Maya recognized the tactics of someone skilled in getting what they wanted through manipulation rather than merit. Susan examined both boarding passes carefully, her experienced eyes taking in not just the seat assignments but the passengers themselves. Mrs. Hamilton, I can see this is frustrating, but Mrs. Richardson's boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A. Your assigned seat is 4C, which is also an aisle seat. But it's not in the front row, Rebecca protested, her medical condition apparently forgotten. I specifically paid extra for front row seating. My husband's assistant always makes these arrangements for me. There must be some mistake in your system. A businessman in seat 3A looked up from his laptop. Excuse me, but some of us have connecting flights to catch. Could this be resolved quickly? His tone was polite but impatient, and Maya caught the subtle way he looked at her when he spoke, as if she were the cause of the delay. Rebecca seized on this immediately. Exactly. See? She's causing problems for everyone. I just want to sit in my usual seat and let everyone get on with their day. Maya had remained silent during this exchange, but now she spoke with measured precision. Susan, I'd like to clarify something. Mrs. Hamilton claims she specifically paid for front row seating, but seat 4C is not a front row seat, and if she had paid for seat selection, that would be noted in the reservation system. Could you check her booking details? Susan's expression shifted slightly. Maya's question demonstrated a level of knowledge about airline operations that went beyond the typical passenger complaint. Mrs. Richardson, you seem familiar with our booking procedures. I work in the industry, Maya replied simply, offering no further explanation. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Oh, so you think you know better than the paying customers? Let me guess. You're probably some entry-level gate agent trying to act important. The condescension in Rebecca's voice was unmistakable, and several passengers visibly cringed. The elderly gentleman in 1B cleared his throat disapprovingly, while a young woman across the aisle stopped pretending to read her magazine and openly stared at the unfolding drama. Maya felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she channeled it into icy calm. Mrs. Hamilton, I haven't made any claims about knowing better than anyone. I simply asked for clarification about the booking details, which seems reasonable given the circumstances. Reasonable? Rebecca's voice rose again. What's reasonable is respecting customers who've been loyal to this airline for years. I shouldn't have to justify my seat to someone who probably flies once a year on vacation. Susan stepped in before Maya could respond. Mrs. Hamilton, I need to ask you to lower your voice. We have other passengers trying to prepare for departure, and we need to resolve this calmly. But Rebecca was gaining momentum, emboldened by what she perceived as support from the impatient businessman. This is exactly what's wrong with customer service these days. Instead of taking care of your established customers, you're bending over backward to accommodate someone who's clearly trying to cause trouble. A new voice entered the conversation. Actually, the lady with the boarding pass for 2A should get the seat. The speaker was a middle-aged black woman in seat 5B, her nurse's scrubs visible beneath her cardigan. I've been watching this whole thing, and she's been nothing but polite. Rebecca whirled around. No one asked for your opinion. This doesn't concern you. The nurse, whose name tag read Patricia Williams, didn't back down. When someone's being treated unfairly right in front of me, it concerns me plenty. The dynamic in the cabin was shifting. What had started as a simple seating dispute was revealing deeper tensions, and passengers were choosing sides based on what they'd witnessed. A young man in row 6 had his phone out, clearly recording. Two women traveling together whispered urgently to each other while shooting disapproving looks at Rebecca. Susan raised her voice slightly to regain control. "Everyone, please. We need to resolve this situation and get underway. Mrs. Hamilton, I'm going to need you to move to your assigned seat 4C. "I'm not moving," Rebecca declared, crossing her arms like a petulant child. "I want to speak to the captain. I want to speak to someone in management who understands customer loyalty and the value of repeat business." Maya watched this display with growing amazement. In her years of airline operations, she'd seen difficult passengers, but Rebecca's sense of entitlement was extraordinary. The woman genuinely seemed to believe that her perceived status gave her the right to take someone else's seat and then blame them for the resulting conflict. "Mrs. Hamilton," Maya said quietly, "you're causing a delay for everyone on this flight. Is this really worth it?" Rebecca's response was swift and venomous. "Don't you dare try to blame me for anything. You're the one making a scene over a seat. This is typical behavior. Always playing the victim. Always making everything about race when it's really about class and knowing your place." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers audibly gasped. The businessman who had complained about delays suddenly found his laptop very interesting. Even Susan looked stunned by the blatant nature of Rebecca's statement. Maya felt something shift inside her, not anger, but a crystalline clarity. She'd spent years navigating situations like this with diplomacy and restraint, always taking the high road, always being the bigger person. But sometimes, the high road led nowhere. "Mrs. Hamilton," Maya said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several passengers look up sharply, "I think you've made your position quite clear. Susan, I'd like to request that this incident be fully documented and reported to your corporate office." Susan nodded, reaching for her tablet. "Of course, Mrs. Richardson. Can I get your full name and contact information for the report?" Maya Richardson, Senior Vice President of Operations, Meridian Airlines. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's face went through several color changes as the implications sank in. The businessman closed his laptop entirely. Even the flight attendants who had been preparing the cabin for departure stopped what they were doing. Rebecca's voice, when she finally found it, was much smaller than before. "You're... what?" Maya smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft, but it wasn't a warm expression. "I believe Susan asked you to move to seat 4C, Mrs. Hamilton. Shall we complete the boarding process so these passengers can get to their destinations on time?" But Rebecca, rather than backing down, seemed to double down on her position. "I don't care what you claim to be. Anyone can say they're an executive. This is still my seat and I'm not moving." The cabin fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. It was the silence of people witnessing something that was about to go very, very wrong. Captain David Chen had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit through updates from his crew, but the prolonged delay and escalating passenger complaints had finally drawn him out personally. At 52, he commanded respect through competence rather than volume. His calm demeanor earned through 28 years of flying in countless challenging situations. "Good morning, everyone," he announced as he entered the first-class cabin, his captain's stripes immediately shifting the atmosphere. "I understand we have a seating issue that needs resolution." Rebecca straightened in the disputed seat, clearly viewing the captain's arrival as validation. "Captain, thank goodness you're here. I'm Rebecca Hamilton, and I've been a loyal customer of this airline for over 10 years. There's been a terrible mistake with the seating assignments, and your staff is being very unreasonable about correcting it." Captain Chen nodded politely, then turned to Susan. "What's the situation?" Susan handed him her tablet with the documented details. "Mrs. Richardson has a boarding pass for seat 2A. Mrs. Hamilton's assigned seat is 4C. Mrs. refusing to move to her assigned seat and has made several concerning comments about Mrs. Richardson." As Captain Chen reviewed the documentation, Maya noticed his eyebrows rise slightly when he read her name and title. His experience in the industry meant he likely recognized the significance of having a competing airline senior executive on board, especially one experiencing poor customer service. Mrs. Hamilton, Captain Chen addressed Rebecca with professional courtesy. I can see this has been frustrating, but airline seating assignments are non-negotiable for safety and security reasons. I need to ask you to move to your assigned seat so we can complete our departure preparations. Rebecca's confidence faltered momentarily, but then she rallied. Captain, with all due respect, I think you should know what kind of person you're defending here. This woman has been aggressive and confrontational from the moment she boarded. She's clearly trying to cause problems, and frankly, I don't feel safe sitting near someone with that kind of attitude. The accusation of aggression was so contrary to what every witness had observed that several passengers actually laughed out loud. The businessman who had earlier seemed annoyed with Maya now shook his head in disbelief. Even the toddler in the back seemed to sense the absurdity, pointing at Rebecca and asking his mother loudly, "Why is that lady telling fibs?" Maya had remained silent during Rebecca's latest performance, but now she spoke directly to Captain Chen. Captain, I'd like to request that this entire incident be escalated to your airline's executive customer relations team. Given the nature of Mrs. Hamilton's comments and behavior, this goes beyond a simple seating dispute. Captain Chen studied Maya carefully. Mrs. Richardson, may I ask what your connection to the airline industry is? I'm Senior Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airlines, Maya replied. And while I'm traveling as a passenger today, I can't ignore what I'm witnessing in terms of customer service protocols and discrimination issues. The impact of this information on Captain Chen was immediate and visible. Meridian Airlines wasn't just any competitor. It was one of the industry's most respected carriers, known for operational excellence and customer service innovation. Having one of their senior executives witness such a debacle was potentially catastrophic for Atlantic Airways. Rebecca, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Oh, so now you're threatening us with your corporate connections? This is exactly what I'm talking about. People like you always think you can bully your way into getting special treatment. Patricia Williams, the nurse who had earlier defended Maya, stood up from her seat. Lady, are you hearing yourself? You're the one bullying everyone and refusing to follow the rules. That woman hasn't done anything wrong except ask for her assigned seat. A chorus of agreement rose from other passengers. The elderly gentleman in 1B nodded vigorously. A couple in row 3 exchanged meaningful looks and whispered their support. Even flight attendants who weren't directly involved in the situation had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene. Captain Chen raised his hand for silence. Mrs. Hamilton, I'm going to ask you one final time to move to seat 4C. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to involve airport security and remove you from the aircraft. Rebecca's face went through a series of expressions: shock, indignation, and then calculation. You're going to throw off a loyal customer because some random person claims to be an airline executive? Anyone can say they work for an airline. Where's her proof? Where's her employee ID? Quote, Maya reached into her purse and pulled out her Meridian Airlines corporate identification badge, holding it where Captain Chen could see it clearly. The captain examined it briefly, then handed it back with a nod of recognition. Mrs. Hamilton, he said, his tone becoming more formal, Mrs. Richardson's credentials are legitimate. This is your final opportunity to move to your assigned seat voluntarily. But Rebecca had crossed a line from which there was no return. This is discrimination, she declared loudly. You're treating me differently because I'm white and she's black. This is reverse racism, and I'm going to sue this airline for everything it's worth. The irony of the accusation was so profound that several passengers burst into laughter. The young man who had been recording on his phone looked at his screen in amazement, as if he couldn't believe what he was capturing. Maya felt a moment of professional sympathy for Captain Chen and his crew. They were caught in an impossible situation, dealing with a passenger whose behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and inappropriate. But she also recognized this as a teachable moment, an opportunity to demonstrate how leadership should respond to discrimination and entitlement. Captain Chen, Maya said, standing up for the first time since the confrontation began, I'd like to make a suggestion. As someone who deals with operational challenges daily, I think there's a solution here that serves everyone's interests. Captain Chen looked relieved at the prospect of a resolution. I'm listening, Mrs. Richardson. Maya smiled, but her expression carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of people. I think Mrs. Hamilton would be much more comfortable in the main cabin, where she might find more passengers, compatible with her worldview. I'm sure you have available seats there." The suggestion was delivered with such diplomatic politeness that it took a moment for Rebecca to understand what Maya was actually proposing. When it hit her, her face turned bright red. "You want to demote me to coach? I paid for the first class. This is outrageous." Maya's voice remained calm and professional. "Mrs. Hamilton, you've made it clear that you're uncomfortable in first class. I'm simply suggesting a solution that might make your flight more pleasant." Captain Chen caught on immediately. The proposal would resolve the immediate conflict, while also serving as a consequence for Rebecca's behavior. "Mrs. Hamilton, we do have available seats in the main cabin. Under the circumstances, I think that might be the best solution for everyone." Rebecca looked around the cabin, suddenly realizing that she had no allies left. Every passenger, every crew member, was now looking at her with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. Her performance had backfired spectacularly. "This is illegal," she sputtered. "You can't force me to give up my first-class seat." Maya pulled out her phone and began typing. "Actually, Mrs. Hamilton, airline crew members have broad authority to reseat passengers for safety and security reasons. I'm documenting this entire incident for my company's training purposes. This is exactly the kind of situation we use in our customer service workshops." The realization that she was now going to become a cautionary tale seemed to finally penetrate Rebecca's consciousness. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely uncertain. Captain Chen gestured toward the aisle. "Mrs. Hamilton, airport security is on their way to assist with your relocation. You can either move voluntarily to an available seat in the main cabin, or you can explain your behavior to security officers and potentially miss your flight entirely." The sound of footsteps in the jet bridge announced the arrival of airport security, and Rebecca's last vestiges of defiance finally crumbled. 2 airport security officers entered the first-class cabin, their presence immediately commanding attention from every passenger. Officer Maria Santos, a veteran of 15 years with airport security, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes, while her partner, Officer James Mitchell, positioned himself near the entrance to prevent any escalation from spilling into the main cabin. "Good morning, Captain Chen," Officer Santos said professionally. "We received a report of a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Rebecca's demeanor changed instantly upon seeing the security officers. The bravado that had sustained her through the entire confrontation evaporated, replaced by a desperate attempt to regain sympathy. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. I'm the victim in this situation. This airline is discriminating against me because I'm a loyal customer who knows my rights." Officer Santos turned to Captain Chen. "Can you walk me through what's happened?" Captain Chen gestured toward the disputed seats. "Mrs. Hamilton is refusing to move to her assigned seat, 4C, and is instead occupying seat 2A, which belongs to Mrs. Richardson. The situation has escalated beyond a simple seating dispute, with Mrs. Hamilton making inappropriate comments about other passengers." Maya stepped forward, her corporate ID still visible. "Officers, I'm Maya Richardson, Senior Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airlines. I'd like to request that this incident be thoroughly documented, as it represents serious customer service and discrimination issues that need to be addressed at the corporate level." Officer Santos examined Maya's credentials carefully, then looked at Rebecca with new understanding. In her 15 years of security work, she'd learned to recognize the difference between legitimate complaints and entitled behavior. This situation clearly fell into the latter category. "Mrs. Hamilton," Officer Santos addressed Rebecca directly, "can you explain why you haven't moved to your assigned seat?" Rebecca's response revealed the depth of her delusion. "Because I always sit in 2A. I've been flying this route for years, and I shouldn't have to justify my seat to someone who clearly doesn't understand how airline loyalty programs work. This woman," she pointed at Maya, "is obviously trying to cause trouble by claiming to be some kind of executive." The accusation that Maya was lying about her position sparked immediate reactions from the passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. Patricia Williams, the nurse, spoke up firmly. "Officer, I've been watching this whole thing from the beginning. That lady," she pointed at Rebecca, "has been nothing but rude and discriminatory. Mrs. Richardson has been nothing but professional." The elderly gentleman in 1B added his voice. "Young man, I'm 83 years old, and I've never seen such appalling behavior on an airplane. This Hamilton woman has been making racist comments and refusing to follow basic rules. Officer Mitchell had been quietly observing the passenger reactions, and now he addressed Captain Chen. "Sir, what specific company policies has Mrs. Hamilton violated?" Captain Chen pulled out his tablet, which had been documenting the incident in real time. Failure to comply with crew instructions, disruptive behavior affecting other passengers, discriminatory language, and creating a safety concern by preventing timely departure. Maya realized this was the moment to demonstrate exactly why she held a senior position in airline operations. "Officers, if I may add some context from an operational perspective," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood every aspect of airline management. "What you're witnessing here isn't just a customer service issue. It's a perfect example of how individual passenger behavior can cascade into operational failures that affect hundreds of people." She gestured toward the cabin. "This flight was scheduled to depart at 7:45 a.m. We're now approaching 8:15 a.m., which means we're looking at potential gate delays, air traffic control complications, and downstream effects on connecting flights. Mrs. Hamilton's refusal to follow crew instructions has created a domino effect that will impact operations throughout the day." Rebecca interrupted desperately. "She's just trying to sound important. Anyone can use airline jargon." Maya smiled and pulled out her phone. "Officer Santos, would you like me to call my counterpart at Atlantic Airways to verify my identity and discuss how this incident should be handled from a corporate perspective?" Before Officer Santos could respond, Maya was already dialing. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Atlantic Airways Executive Offices, this is Margaret speaking." "Margaret, this is Maya Richardson, SVP Operations at Meridian Airlines. I need to speak with your VP of Customer Experience immediately regarding a serious incident involving discrimination and customer service failures on Flight 447. Margaret's voice became instantly alert. "Ms. Richardson, I'll connect you immediately. Please hold." The cabin fell silent as passengers realized they were witnessing a conversation that would have corporate-level ramifications. Rebecca's face had gone pale as the reality of the situation finally began to penetrate her entitled worldview. Within seconds, a new voice came on the line. "Maya, this is Robert Thompson, VP Customer Experience at Atlantic Airways. What's happening?" Maya put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Robert, I'm currently aboard Flight 447 as a passenger, experiencing what I can only describe as one of the most egregious examples of customer service failure and passenger discrimination I've ever witnessed. I have airport security here documenting the incident." Robert's voice carried immediate concern. "Maya, I'm deeply sorry you're experiencing this. Can you give me the details?" Maya provided a concise but comprehensive summary of the events, her professional tone making each fact land with devastating clarity. As she spoke, Rebecca seemed to shrink into the disputed seat, finally understanding that her actions had consequences far beyond her personal comfort. "Robert," Maya continued, "I'm not calling as a competitor trying to create problems. I'm calling as an industry professional who believes we all have a responsibility to maintain standards of dignity and respect for all passengers, regardless of their race, background, or perceived status." Robert's response was immediate and decisive. "Maya, first, please accept my personal apology for this unacceptable situation. Second, I want to assure you that Mrs. Hamilton will be permanently banned from all Atlantic Airways flights, effective immediately. Third, I'd like to discuss how we can make this right and also learn from this incident to improve our training protocols." The words "permanently banned" hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "Wait, what? You can't ban me. I haven't done anything wrong. This is all a misunderstanding." Officer Santos stepped closer to Rebecca. "Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and come with us. You're being removed from this aircraft." Rebecca's last desperate gambit was to appeal directly to the passengers who had witnessed her behavior. "You all heard what happened. She was the one being difficult. I was just trying to sit in my seat." But the passengers' expressions ranged from disgust to pity, and no one came to her defense. Even the businessman who had initially seemed annoyed with the delay was now shaking his head at Rebecca's continued delusions. Maya watched as Rebecca finally stood up from seat 2A, gathering her expensive handbag and designer luggage with shaking hands. The woman who had entered the plane with such confidence and entitlement was now facing the consequences of behavior that had revealed her true character to everyone present. "Mrs. Hamilton," Maya said quietly as Rebecca was escorted past her, "I hope you use this experience to reflect on how your actions affect other people." Rebecca's final words as she was led away were both pathetic and revealing. This isn't fair. People like me built this country. We deserve respect." As the aircraft door closed behind Rebecca and the security officers, Captain Chen turned to Maya with profound relief and respect. "Mrs. Richardson, I cannot adequately apologize for what you've experienced today. This is not representative of Atlantic Airways' values or standards." Maya settled into seat 2A, finally able to claim what had been rightfully hers from the beginning. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. Sometimes these incidents, as unfortunate as they are, provide valuable learning opportunities for entire organizations." The cabin began to settle as passengers processed what they had witnessed. Flight attendants resumed their pre-flight preparations, but there was a different energy now, a sense that something significant had occurred that went far beyond a simple seating dispute. As the engines finally began to spool up for departure, Maya looked out the window and saw Rebecca being escorted through the terminal, her entitled journey having come to an abrupt and very public end. As Flight 447 finally lifted off from Chicago O'Hare 43 minutes behind schedule, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine morning departure had become a masterclass in corporate leadership, personal dignity, and the consequences of unchecked privilege. Maya settled into her rightful seat, finally able to focus on her upcoming presentation, but she found her mind processing the broader implications of what had just occurred. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert Thompson at Atlantic Airways. "Maya, our CEO wants to schedule a call with you this afternoon. We're implementing immediate policy changes based on today's incident." Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom, addressing the entire aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure. We encountered an unusual situation that required careful handling to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. We'll be making up time during our flight to Los Angeles and should arrive close to our scheduled time." Quote. Patricia Williams, the nurse who had defended Maya during the confrontation, approached from her seat in row 5. "Excuse me, Mrs. Richardson? I just wanted to say how impressed I was with how you handled that situation. I'm a charge nurse at Chicago General, and I deal with difficult people every day, but I've never seen someone maintain such professionalism under that kind of pressure." Maya smiled warmly. "Thank you, Patricia. I have to say, your support meant a lot. Sometimes it's easy to feel isolated in situations like that, and knowing that others were willing to speak up made all the difference." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking about what just happened. That woman's behavior wasn't just about a seat. It was about power, and who she thought deserved respect. The fact that she couldn't back down even when faced with consequences shows how deep that kind of thinking goes." Their conversation was interrupted by Susan Morrison, the senior flight attendant, who approached with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Richardson, I wanted to personally apologize for how this situation unfolded. In 23 years of flying, I've never experienced anything quite like that." Maya appreciated the apology but saw an opportunity for constructive dialogue. "Susan, I don't hold you or your crew responsible for Mrs. Hamilton's behavior, but I am curious about your training protocols for handling discrimination incidents. This situation could have escalated much further if handled differently." Susan's professional demeanor shifted to genuine interest. "Actually, we'd welcome any insights you could share. Our current training focuses mainly on safety and basic customer service conflicts, but nothing quite prepares you for what we just experienced." Maya pulled out her tablet, opening a presentation file she'd developed for Meridian Airlines' crew training program. "This is something we implemented after studying similar incidents across the industry. The key is recognizing the difference between legitimate complaints and discriminatory behavior early in the interaction." As Maya explained her company's approach to bias training and conflict resolution, other passengers began to listen in. The elderly gentleman from 1B, who introduced himself as retired federal judge Harold Weinstein, added his perspective on the legal implications of discrimination in public accommodations. "What's particularly interesting about today's incident," Judge Weinstein observed, "is how it demonstrated the intersection of corporate policy, individual rights, and social responsibility. Mrs. Richardson's position gave her unique authority to address the situation, but her restraint and professionalism were what made the resolution possible." The businessman from row 3, who had initially seemed impatient with the delay, approached Maya with an unexpected confession. "Mrs. Richardson, I owe you an apology. When this whole thing started, I was frustrated about the delay, and probably looked at you as part of the problem. It wasn't until I heard the full conversation that I realized what was really happening. That kind of unconscious bias is something I need to examine in myself. Maya was struck by his honesty. I appreciate you sharing that, Mr. Davidson, Tom Davidson from Davidson Financial Services. He handed her his business card. I'd like to learn more about the training programs you mentioned. If we're honest, discrimination exists in every industry, and those of us in leadership positions have a responsibility to address it. Meanwhile, throughout the main cabin, word of the incident was spreading through whispered conversations and text messages. The young man who had recorded parts of the confrontation was carefully editing the footage, planning to share it as an example of how discrimination should be confronted and resolved. A flight attendant from the main cabin approached Maya with a request. Mrs. Richardson, I'm Jennifer Walsh, and I've been working for Atlantic Airways for 8 years. Several of us back there have been talking, and we'd love to know if you'd be willing to speak at our next crew training session about what happened today. Maya considered the request thoughtfully. Jennifer, I'd be happy to participate, but I think it would be more valuable to develop a collaborative training program between Atlantic Airways and Meridian Airlines. This kind of issue affects the entire industry, and we all benefit when standards improve across the board. Susan Morrison, who had been listening to these conversations, pulled out her phone. Mrs. Richardson, would you mind if I called our corporate training department right now? I think they need to hear about this approach while the incident is still fresh. Quote, as Susan made her call, Maya reflected on how the situation was evolving from a negative experience into a catalyst for positive change. Her phone showed several missed calls from colleagues at Meridian Airlines, who had already heard about the incident through industry networks. The ripple effects were extending beyond the aircraft. At Chicago O'Hare, airport security was reviewing their protocols for handling discrimination complaints. The incident had been flagged as a case study for improving coordination between airline crew and security personnel. Robert Thompson at Atlantic Airways was already in emergency meetings with his executive team, reviewing every aspect of their customer service policies. The company's legal department was preparing a comprehensive response plan, not just for potential litigation, but for implementing systemic changes to prevent similar incidents. Maya's assistant had forwarded several interview requests from aviation industry publications wanting to discuss the incident and its implications for airline operations. The story was becoming a touchstone for broader conversations about discrimination in travel and the responsibilities of corporate leaders. Judge Weinstein, who had been quietly observing the ongoing conversations, offered another perspective. What's remarkable about this situation is how it demonstrates the power of collective action. Mrs. Hamilton's behavior was enabled by the assumption that no one would challenge her, but when multiple people stood up, passengers, crew, corporate executives, her position became untenable. Patricia Williams nodded in agreement. In healthcare, we call it culture of safety, creating an environment where everyone feels responsible for speaking up when they see something wrong. It sounds like that's what happened here. Maya was impressed by the depth of analysis from her fellow passengers. You're absolutely right, Patricia. One of the things we've learned in airline operations is that safety, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, requires everyone to take responsibility. No one person can create a respectful environment alone. As the flight continued toward Los Angeles, Maya found herself engaged in the most meaningful professional conversation she'd had in months. The incident that had started as a simple seating dispute had evolved into a collaborative discussion about leadership, accountability, and social responsibility. Her presentation to the Meridian Airlines board would certainly be important, but Maya realized that the real impact of this day might come from the connections she was making with people who were committed to creating positive change in their own spheres of influence. The irony wasn't lost on her that Rebecca Hamilton's discriminatory behavior had inadvertently created an opportunity for exactly the kind of industry collaboration and social progress that Maya had been advocating for throughout her career. As the aircraft began its descent toward Los Angeles, Maya looked around the cabin at the passengers who had become unlikely allies in a fight for dignity and respect. The morning had started with a challenge to her right to occupy a seat she had paid for, but it was ending with a renewed sense of purpose and community that would extend far beyond this single flight. 1 year after Flight 447, Maya Richardson stood at the podium of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, addressing an audience of global leaders, Fortune 500 CEOs, and heads of state from around the world. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast a warm glow across the sea of faces as she prepared to deliver what would become known as the Davos Declaration on Human Dignity and Commerce. The journey from a disputed airplane seat to the world's most prestigious economic forum still felt surreal to Maya. Her presentation, titled "The Economics of Dignity: How Respect Drives Revenue," would be translated into 17 languages and broadcast to over 200 million viewers worldwide. The woman who had simply wanted to sit in her assigned seat had become the face of a global movement that was reshaping how businesses thought about human rights and profitability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from a year of transforming corporate cultures and government policies. "Exactly 1 year ago today, I experienced discrimination on a commercial flight. What happened next proves that when we choose dignity over division, when we choose courage over comfort, we don't just change individual lives, we change the world." The audience, which included the CEOs of 3 major airlines that had been initially resistant to change, listened intently as Maya outlined the unprecedented transformation that had occurred across the global transportation industry. The statistics were staggering. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 89% across participating airlines. Customer satisfaction had reached historic highs, and employee engagement scores had improved dramatically as workers felt empowered to stand up for passengers' rights. But Maya's presentation went far beyond aviation. The dignity dividend, as economists had begun calling it, was being measured across industries worldwide. Hotels implementing dignity protocols were seeing higher occupancy rates and premium pricing power. Restaurants with comprehensive anti-discrimination training were experiencing increased customer loyalty and positive reviews. Even retail chains were discovering that dignity-focused customer service was driving measurable increases in sales and brand preference. "The data is clear," Maya continued, advancing to a slide showing global economic impact. "Companies that prioritize human dignity don't just do good, they do well." The aggregate economic benefit of dignity-based business practices has generated over $47 billion in additional revenue worldwide, while simultaneously creating more inclusive and respectful societies. In the audience, Dr. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, nodded approvingly. He had personally invited Maya to speak after reading her research on the intersection of social justice and economic performance. The forum had never featured a presentation that so comprehensively linked moral leadership with business success. Following Maya in the speaking lineup was President Michel Santos of Brazil, who had implemented nationwide dignity standards for all public transportation in her country. Maya Richardson showed us that leadership isn't about the position you hold, it's about the principles you defend, President Santos would tell the assembly. Brazil's implementation of dignity protocols has not only reduced discrimination, but has actually increased tourism revenue by 32%, as international travelers choose destinations that guarantee respectful treatment. After her presentation, Maya was surrounded by world leaders eager to discuss implementation in their own countries and organizations. Chancellor Emma Müller of Germany wanted to explore dignity standards for the European Union's transportation network. Prime Minister David Chen of Singapore was interested in making dignity certification mandatory for all businesses operating in his country's airports and ports. The conversations continued through the afternoon in smaller working groups, where Maya found herself collaborating with individuals she had only read about in international news. The CEO of the world's largest hotel chain was developing a global dignity certification program for the hospitality industry. The head of the International Olympic Committee was exploring how dignity standards could be implemented for all future Olympic Games, ensuring that athletes and spectators from every nation would be treated with equal respect. But perhaps the most significant development was the announcement of the Global Dignity Institute, a new international organization that Maya would lead as its founding director. Funded by a coalition of governments, corporations, and philanthropic organizations, the institute would serve as the worldwide authority on dignity standards, research, and implementation across all industries. That evening, at a private dinner hosted by the Swiss government, Maya met with survivors of discrimination from around the world who had been inspired by her story to speak up about their own experiences. Maria Gonzalez, a Spanish engineer, had successfully challenged workplace discrimination at a major technology company, leading to industry-wide policy changes in Spain. Dr. James Okoye, a Nigerian physician, had used Maya's strategies to address medical bias in European hospitals, improving patient care for African immigrants across the continent. "Maya," said Dr. Amina Hassan, a Somali refugee who had become a prominent human rights advocate, "your courage on that airplane gave permission to millions of us to demand the dignity we deserve." The ripple effects have reached refugee camps, corporate boardrooms, and government halls around the world. These personal testimonies reminded Maya that the true measure of success wasn't found in economic data or policy changes, but in the individual moments of dignity that were now possible because people had chosen to stand up rather than stay silent. Every prevented incident of discrimination represented someone's daughter, son, parent, or friend who could navigate the world with confidence that their humanity would be respected. The following day, Maya participated in a groundbreaking ceremony that would have seemed impossible just 1 year earlier: the signing of the International Covenant on Dignity and Commerce, a treaty that established universal standards for respectful treatment in all commercial interactions. Representatives from 83 countries signed the accord, committing their nations to implement and enforce dignity standards across transportation, hospitality, retail, and other customer-facing industries. The signing ceremony was particularly meaningful because it took place in the same conference room where the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights had been amended 30 years earlier. Maya stood next to Secretary General Patricia Williams, the same nurse who had defended her on Flight 447 and had since risen to lead the UN's newly created Office of Global Dignity. 1 year ago, Patricia said during her remarks, "I witnessed a moment of injustice on an airplane, but I also witnessed something more powerful: the courage to transform that injustice into justice. Today, we're not just signing a treaty, we're declaring that dignity is not optional, it's essential." The treaty included provisions that would have been unthinkable before Flight 447. Countries committed to establishing independent dignity ombudsmen with the authority to investigate discrimination complaints across all industries. Corporations with international operations would be required to obtain dignity certification, demonstrating their commitment to respectful treatment of all customers and employees. Most significantly, the treaty established a fund to support individuals facing discrimination, ensuring that financial resources would never prevent someone from seeking justice. As Maya watched world leaders sign the covenant, she thought about the passengers and crew members from Flight 447 whose courage had made this moment possible. Captain David Chen had been promoted to chief pilot for training and was now developing dignity protocols for pilots worldwide. Judge Harold Weinstein had become the International Court of Justice's special rapporteur on commercial discrimination. Even Tom Davidson, the businessman who had initially been impatient with the delay, had transformed his financial services company into a model for inclusive business practices and was now funding dignity training programs in developing countries. The most poignant moment came when Rebecca Hamilton's name was mentioned during the proceedings, not as a villain to be condemned, but as an example of how individual transformation was possible even after serious mistakes. Rebecca had spent the year in intensive therapy and volunteer work with civil rights organizations, and had become an advocate for addressing unconscious bias and privilege. Her journey from entitled discrimination to genuine understanding had become a case study in personal redemption that was being used in rehabilitation programs worldwide. "We must remember," Maya told the assembly, "that our goal isn't to punish those who have discriminated, but to create systems and cultures where discrimination becomes impossible to sustain." Rebecca Hamilton's transformation shows us that even those who cause harm can become agents of positive change when given the opportunity and support to grow. That afternoon, Maya received a video call from the International Space Station, where Commander Lisa Park, the first Korean-American woman to command the ISS, wanted to thank Maya for her work. "Maya, up here in space, we see Earth without borders, without divisions. Your work is helping humanity live up to the unity that's visible from this perspective. The dignity protocols we've implemented for international space missions were directly inspired by your research." The global reach of the dignity movement continued to expand in unexpected directions. Professional sports leagues were implementing dignity standards for fans, players, and staff. Universities were requiring dignity training for all students and faculty. Even online platforms were developing algorithms to detect and prevent discriminatory behavior in digital spaces. But Maya's proudest achievement was the establishment of the Youth Dignity Ambassador Program, which trained young people around the world to recognize and address discrimination in their communities. The program had already engaged over 100,000 students in 57 countries, creating a generation of leaders who understood that dignity was not negotiable and that they had the power to create positive change. During the final evening of the forum, Maya received an unexpected visitor in her hotel suite, her mother, Dorothy Richardson, who had flown from Chicago to witness her daughter's triumph. Dorothy, who had worked as a housekeeper for 40 years and had faced her own share of discrimination, sat in the elegant room overlooking the Swiss Alps and marveled at how far they had come. "Baby girl," Dorothy said, tears in her eyes, "when you called me from that airplane a year ago, I was worried they would try to make you feel small. Instead, you made the whole world bigger. You showed everyone that dignity isn't something you ask for. It's something you demand and something you give to others." Maya hugged her mother, thinking about all the sacrifices Dorothy had made to ensure her daughter could pursue her dreams. The hotel suite was luxurious, but what mattered most was that they were there together, celebrating not just personal success, but a transformation that would benefit countless future generations. As the forum concluded, Maya was approached by a delegation of young activists from around the world who wanted to share how the Flight 447 story had influenced their own work. Sarah Chen, a 17-year-old from San Francisco, had started a dignity club at her high school that had eliminated bullying incidents entirely. Marcus Johnson, a college student from Atlanta, had used dignity principles to address racial bias in his university's admissions process. Priya Patel, a graduate student from Mumbai, had developed a mobile app that allowed people to report and track discrimination incidents in real time. "Mrs. Richardson," Sarah said, speaking for the group, "you showed us that age doesn't matter, position doesn't matter. What matters is whether you're willing to stand up for what's right. We're the dignity generation, and we're going to make sure this movement continues for the rest of our lives." Maya was moved by their commitment and energy. The transfer of leadership to young people ensured that the dignity movement would outlast any individual leader and would continue to evolve with new challenges and opportunities. The final event of Maya's trip was a visit to the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, where scientists from around the world collaborated on humanity's greatest scientific questions. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the facility's director, had invited Maya to see how dignity principles were being applied to international scientific collaboration. "Maya, what we've learned from your work is that breakthrough discoveries require not just intellectual diversity, but dignity and respect for all perspectives, drive," Vasquez explained as they toured the facility. "When people feel valued and respected, they're more willing to share bold ideas and challenge conventional thinking. The dignity protocols we've implemented have actually accelerated our research because our teams communicate more effectively and inclusively." As Maya's plane lifted off from Zurich for the flight back to Chicago, she reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed her from a passenger seeking her assigned seat to a global leader in human rights and dignity. The view from 35,000 feet reminded her of Commander Park's words about seeing Earth without borders or divisions, a perspective that the dignity movement was helping to bring to ground level. The flight attendant, recognizing Maya from news coverage, approached with a smile. "Mrs. Richardson, I wanted to thank you personally. The training our airline received because of your work has made my job so much more fulfilling. I feel empowered to ensure every passenger is treated with respect, and our customers notice the difference." Maya smiled, thinking about how far the aviation industry had come since that morning on Flight 447. Every flight was now an opportunity to demonstrate that dignity and respect were possible, and that business success and human rights were not only compatible but mutually reinforcing. As she settled in for the flight home, ironically, in Seat 2A, Maya opened her laptop to review messages from colleagues around the world. The Global Dignity Institute was already receiving requests from governments and organizations eager to implement dignity standards. The movement that had begun with one woman's refusal to accept discrimination had become an unstoppable force for positive change that was touching every corner of human society. Maya's final thought as the plane crossed the Atlantic was about the power of individual choice in shaping collective destiny. Every person who chose dignity over discrimination, respect over prejudice, and courage over comfort was helping to build a world where everyone could travel through life with their humanity intact. The seat in 2A had been just the beginning of a journey that would continue as long as people were willing to stand up for what was right. The story of Flight 447 would be told for generations to come, not as a tale of conflict overcome, but as a reminder that ordinary moments contain extraordinary opportunities to change the world. And somewhere in the skies above the Earth, on flights connecting every nation and culture, passengers were experiencing the dignity that Maya Richardson had fought for and one on that transformative morning when she refused to let injustice have the last word. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.